You've seen them everywhere, from blockbuster weight loss drugs like Ozempic that are all over the news to these mysterious compounds popping up in biohacking circles. Peptides are, without a doubt, one of the hottest topics in medicine right now, but they're also one of the most controversial. So, what's the real story here? Well, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to break it all down and separate the proven science from the speculative hype. And our story starts way back. I want you to picture this. It's Toronto, 1922. There's a 14-year-old boy, Leonard Thompson, lying in a hospital bed. He weighs just 65 pounds, and he's literally wasting away from type 1 diabetes. Back then, that diagnosis was a death sentence. There was no cure. The only so-called treatment was a starvation diet that might buy you a couple of extra months, but the end result was always the same. And then a young surgeon, Frederick Banting, walks into that room. He has this kind of crude, murky extract that he'd pulled from a dog's pancreas. They inject Leonard with it, and within days, his blood sugar levels start to normalize. It's a miracle. He lives for another 13 years. That miracle in a vial, that was insulin, the world's very first peptide drug. In Banting, he sold the patent for just $1 single. He believed it belongs to the world, a spirit of pure discovery that feels, a little different from the market forces driving medicine today. So that single moment in that hospital room kicked off an entire century of research. But what exactly did Banting find? I mean, what is a peptide and how in the world does it work? It's actually way simpler than you might think. Just imagine amino acids are like beads on a necklace. When you string together a short chain of them, we're talking between 2 and 50 beads, that's a peptide. If the chain gets any longer than that, we just call it a protein. That's it. That's really the only difference. Okay, now I know this looks super complicated, but don't worry about all the crazy pathways. Here's the key idea. Your body is already using thousands of different peptides all the time. They're like little messengers. They travel down specific paths to tell your cells what to do. Things like, hey, start healing this cut, or time to manage your metabolism. So the whole goal of peptide therapy is just to create synthetic versions of these messengers to either mimic or boost those natural signals. And that brings us right back to today. 100 years after insulin, we are in the middle of another massive peptide revolution. This time, it's a class of drugs you have definitely heard of, the GLP-1 agonists. And let's be super clear here, these are the real deal. FDA-approved medicines that are backed by huge, incredibly rigorous clinical trials. So let's start with the big one, semaglutide, which you probably know by its brand names Ozempic or Wegovy. What it does is it mimics a hormone in your gut that basically tells your brain you're full, slows down how fast your stomach empties, and helps your pancreas release the right amount of insulin. The results? In the major clinical trials, it led to an average body weight loss of around 15%. That's absolutely incredible. But this is the number that changed everything. The famous SELECT trial, a landmark study, found that for patients with obesity, semaglutide cut the risk of having a heart attack, a stroke, or dying from a cardiovascular event by a whopping 20%. And just like that, the entire conversation shifted. This stopped being just a weight loss drug and became a cardiovascular drug that also happened to cause weight loss, a total game changer. And believe me, the science is not slowing down. Let's look at what's next. This is retatrutide. It's an experimental peptide that actually hits 3 different metabolic receptors, not just one. And the early data from its phase 3 trial is just staggering, almost 29% body weight loss. I mean, we're talking about numbers that we've really only ever seen with things like bariatric surgery. Okay, so that's one world, right? The world of FDA-approved, heavily regulated medicine. But there's this whole other universe of peptides that's emerged right alongside it. This is the experimental frontier. These are the compounds you hear about in anti-aging clinics, at the gym, in biohacking forums, and they do not have FDA approval. Yeah, you'll hear these names tossed around. BPC 157 for healing injuries, GHKCU for skin, DHEXA for your brain, TB 500 for recovery. And when you look at the potential benefits, they sound pretty amazing, right? So the crucial question is, where does this information come from? Well, for the most part, it's coming from studies done in labs or on animals. And that brings us to what is arguably the single most important distinction in all of medicine. And that's the massive, massive gap between something that looks promising in an animal and something that's actually been proven to be safe and effective in a human being. So what does that gap look like?
It looks like this. It's estimated that about 90%, 90, of drugs that look like absolute miracle cures in mice and rats end up failing when they get to human clinical trials. They either just don't work on us or they have side effects that are totally unacceptable.
Let's make this real. Take BPC 157. It's one of the most popular experimental peptides out there. You can find hundreds of studies showing it does incredible things in rats. But how many big, gold standard, randomized, placebo-controlled trials have been published showing it works in humans? Zero. A big fat zero. Now listen, that doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means we don't have the high-quality proof to say that it does.
This lack of human data creates, well, a gray market. It's a world where people are getting these compounds from places like compounding pharmacies or these research chemical websites, and this is where some very real risks start to come into play. The FDA has been sounding the alarm about compounded peptides for a while now. They found facilities that are just not sanitary. They've tested vials and found bacteria and little floating particles in them. They've found products that have the wrong dose or doses that are all over the place. You see, the kind of quality control that's legally required for approved drugs, it often just doesn't exist here. And here's a really subtle but incredibly important detail. Some of these pharmacies use different versions of a peptide, these things called salt forms, like semaglutide sodium. That is not the same thing as the semaglutide base that's in Ozempic. These different versions haven't been tested for safety or efficacy. You have to remember this. Just because it has the same active ingredient in the name does not mean it is the same drug. So where does that leave us? How are we supposed to make sense of all this? Well, you have to realize that we're watching two very different stories unfold at the exact same time. And that contrast really gives us the big picture for the future of peptides. See, on one side, you've got the FDA-approved world. It's a system that's built on these slow, incredibly expensive, but very rigorous human trials. It's all designed to make sure a drug is safe and effective for the mass market. Then, on the other side, you have the experimental world. It's driven by exciting animal data, a much higher tolerance for risk, and a real hunger for faster results outside that traditional system. Understanding this difference, the why behind each world, is really the key to understanding this whole field. And this leaves us with a really fascinating and frankly critical question for the future. Remember, insulin started out as a messy, experimental extract before it was refined and skilled through that rigorous scientific process. So today, as everything moves faster and faster, you have to wonder, where will the next big breakthrough come from? Will it follow that slow, expensive, but proven path of clinical trials? Or could a game-changing discovery actually bubble up from the less regulated, faster-moving world of biohacking? Honestly, only time will tell.